Okay, so here we go. We're back to our regular Tanya classes. Last week we made a rare exception. Today we're back to Tanya. The last 2 weeks we talked about tshuva. And the chassidus of it was that normally a person does tshuva for an aveda. You do tshuva for something you did wrong, specific. What was unusual about the concept that we were discussing the last two classes was that a person is doing tshuva and he's not sure for what. The idea is that, let's put it this way, in Yiddishkeit you're supposed to create traction, right? An inertia. You do something good and it begats itself. It becomes self-generating. Or to use a more subtle term, fluidity. It has to flow. It has to be easy. And when you encounter in Yiddishkeit friction, bumps, there's no traction. You're slipping and you're staying in one place. Or everything seems to be so difficult. To the extent that you just lack all motivation, Alter Rebbe proposes you have to do tshuva. Although you're not sure exactly what you're doing tshuva for, it's conceivable that you have to do tshuva even though you're not sure for what. And we discussed at length the idea of tshuva. What was interesting about it, if you were here 2 weeks ago, when we learned last, I think, we talked about very subtle levels of sin. We have problems, What kind of sins do we have? What kind of sins do we have? That we eat too much. And we can't stop talking. Yeah? And of course, the sin of all sins is that we're lazy. But bigger people have smaller avedas. Each person on his or her level, when there is a chasadim, when there is a deficiency in their avodas Hashem conditioning, they lose their traction. They lose that fluidity. Everything becomes bumpy. And Alter Rebbe went into a whole list of levels of things to correct, higher and higher and finer and so forth. The issue, however, was that tshuva is a bitter process. And that the bitterness of tshuva has a cleansing effect. And there was an interesting notion that emerged from this discourse on tshuva that we had, from this idea that when a person is doing tshuva, so sometimes you're doing tshuva, you're correcting something specific. Sometimes you're returning to God, and you're not even sure why. You just know that something has to be corrected. So you go through the bitter process of tshuva to resensitize yourself and to regain your traction and to go forward. But the Alter Rebbe said something very, very profound. Simple and profound. And radical. In other words, this is a Hasidic position. And you can argue with it. Many would argue with it. But this is the position that the Alter Rebbe takes in the Tanya, this position that the Hasidus takes. And if you're learning the Tanya, you have to learn the Tanya according to where the Tanya was designed by the Mechaber. The perspective, the point of view, the level of the Tanya. And that perspective is, just like the opposite of light is not darkness, the absence of light is darkness. In other words, light and dark are not two equal and opposite forces. They are a thing and a non-thing. Good and evil are not two opposite forces. Good and evil are a thing and a non-thing. The opposite of good is nothing, just like the opposite of light is nothing. Problem is, the idea that the opposite of light is nothing, we all relate to. The idea that the opposite of goodness is nothing is not simple at all. Because essentially it's saying the Yetzer Hara has no reality. And there are many people I know, and I'll start with myself, who would have a very, very big problem with that, because my Yetzer Hara has convinced me that he's realer than I am. How often he wins. Now, Alter Rebbe takes the position there's no reality to the Yetzer Hara. There's no reality to evil. Like there's no reality to darkness. And he described it in the following way. He said all the Yetzer Hara does is make suggestions, proposals. He has no real power over you. If the Yetzer Hara gets you to listen to him, the power of the Yetzer Hara comes from you. I don't mean you. You're a nice guy. In other words, the Yetzer Hara makes a suggestion. When you buy in, when you buckle, when you lose to the Yetzer Hara's provocations, the Yetzer Hara has power, but that power is not the Yetzer Hara's power. It's the power of the Jew. And the proof is that when you don't listen to the Yetzer Hara, you never feel like a hero. When you do the right thing, you don't say, hey, I did such an incredible thing. You say, of course. And the Alter Rebbe illustrated this with the story of the spies. I don't know if you remember, where the spies didn't trust. The spies returned to the desert and they said, we can't go into Israel. We're not going to be able to conquer it. Israel is too strong. So what did God tell the Jewish people? You don't want to go into Israel? No problem. I'll send you kids. That's the whole story. That's all that happened. And all of a sudden they changed their mind. No, we're going to go into Israel. So the Rebbe asks, they didn't believe that Hashem, that God Almighty, has enough power to conquer Israel. And all Moshe Rabbeinu told them was, you don't trust, you don't believe us, and your children, all of a sudden they're full of faith and they're running into the Holy Land. And now the Rebbe answers, faith does not have to be given to the Jew. It's already present. It gets covered over with nonsense. But the nonsense has no reality. When you expose the emptiness, the lack of truth, the substancelessness that there is to evil, the neshama emerges, and that's the true nature of the Jew. So the Alter Rebbe talks about tshuva, and he says tshuva is a bitter process. But the end of tshuva is not simply that you regain your traction. The end of tshuva is not simply that you're forgiven for your sin, that you're not punished. The end of tshuva is that you break the lie of the Yetzer Hara. You break the fog that Klippa brings over a person. And therefore the Alter Rebbe made an interesting argument a couple of classes ago, where he said that a person is down. A person is down. A person doesn't have energy. A person doesn't have will. A person doesn't have any traction. And they do tshuva. The effectiveness of the tshuva is such that all of a sudden, as the expression is, the lights go on. An incredible clarity returns to the person. The reason the Alter Rebbe believes, or postulates, argues, that a person goes from a low to a high is based on this idea that there's no reality to evil. Evil's reality is in our imagination. And when evil has conquered us, we are the energy of the evil. When we crack it, when we overcome it, when we don't give in anymore, it's not just that the evil stops holding us, but the truth emerges. We see that there is no evil. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says after truth there's an incredible clarity. And this clarity expresses itself also in an incredible amount of joy. There's a tremendous amount of joy. There's an incredible amount of happiness in this emergence, in this, if you will, going out of a state of exile, going out of a state of heaviness and depression, lack of traction. Regaining this clarity is a feeling of incredible emancipation, incredible freedom, and there's an enormous amount of joy associated with it.
Question.
At your own risk?
What happens to the people who never conquer it? Do they disappear together with it?
Okay, what's the answer to your question?
I don't know.
People are real, especially a Yid, because he has an neshama. So what disappears is the lie.
But what if he never discovers the truth?
The truth is still there.
He's potentially, right?
No. Spiritually, it's more than potential. It's a little bit more complicated than you make it, for more reasons than one. And one of them is, I think it's pretty hard to live a life and not do good deeds. Intentionally or unintentionally. With a God center or not with a God center. It's kind of difficult for a Yid to live his whole life without doing any mitzvahs. And let the Eibishter be the judge.
So something is left, no matter what?
Something is left no matter what is true. But there's a lot more than something left to be left. Let's look in the mirror. It's the safest place. I mean, it's the most uncomfortable place to look, but that's the only place that matters. The Eibishter Federwelt, it's God's world. And even though He's given us free will, even our free will, it's also God's world. Let's worry. Let's fix what we could fix.
No, it's just that I'm reading Slichot now, and it says there that how Jews are going to get whatever God promised, and it specifies the ones who are left. That's why I'm asking this question.
But I think the slichos are written in past tense, not in future tense. The slichos are not saying what's going to happen. The slichos are saying what has happened. right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah, I read the Slichas too. Now, I don't understand the Hebrew, but I have a Hebrew-English Slichas, and I read the English because I want to understand. It's describing our history. It's describing our history. And everything has many dimensions. The Slichas is one dimension. The Slichas are quite bitter. They are quite bitter. There's other dimensions.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just reiterate what I've said so far. We've been talking about tshuva, and the argument that the Alter Rebbe proposes is that the end of tshuva is clarity. The end of tshuva is that the lights go on in the belief that since the sin, since the Yetzer Hara has no reality, it's just a fog. When you break it, it isn't simply that the hardship passes and you go back to your former condition, but the neshama emerges. And the emergence of the neshama creates an incredible amount of clarity. And in addition to creating an incredible amount of clarity, clearly it comes along with an incredible amount of joy. Okay? There's a piston, there's a Maimer HaChocham. I don't think it's a Maimer Chazal, but it's one of those statements which is very frequently quoted because it's such a wise statement. And it's incredibly relevant in this context. The statement is, Ein simcha k'hataras asfekis. There is no joy like the alleviation of doubt. Nothing makes a person happier than being clear. Uncertainty is a prison. And frequently, we are in uncertain spaces for various different reasons. The Yetzer Hara is uncertainty. You know, I was raised with the old adage, Amalek is begematria safek. You ever heard of Amalek? Amalek is considered like the most evil personification of everything no good is Amalek. Amalek has the numerical equivalent of suffix, of doubt. Amalek doesn't have to be bad, he has to just shed doubt. How do you know? Maybe not. You know, there's an old expression in Yiddish, ki ba'apam hargu ish. You can kill a man with your nose. How do you kill a man with your nose? Someone talks about somebody and you make a face like, who's he? You know, there's all kinds of Lashon Hara. You know, you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara. One kind of Lashon Hara is you mention a person's name and you make a face that says, him. That's all you have to do. And you ruin the person. In any case, that's a Mamalek Gematria Safek. Doubt. And clarity is emancipating. When you know that what you have is correct and your direction is true and good, it's an incredibly redeeming space. So it creates an incredible amount of joy. And a long time ago, we discussed joy. And there, in our discussion on joy that we had in the past, what the Alter Rebbe said was there's two types of joy. There's ordinary joy, and then there's the joy of the Baal Tshuva. There's the joy of a Jew who serves God, and there's a joy who's overcome trials and tribulations, overcome hardships, spiritual hardships. Any person who's in tune with God, any person who has the traction and the fluidity we described, is alive with joy. But for a person for whom it's been consistent, it's one type of joy. For the Baal Tshuva, it's a totally different type of joy. One who has struggled, one who's got doubts, and I suppose all of us can fall into that category. We have moody, you know, we're not always in love with Yiddishkeit. Some days it's hard. Some days we're in a bad mood, and let's not say what happens when we're in bad moods, right? The trick is just to wait for them to pass. And we get past it. And we have clarity again. The joy of the Baal Tshuva, argues Alter Rebbe, is so much greater than the joy of what we call the tzaddik, the person who doesn't get confused, that relatively speaking, it's like light and darkness. In other words, one for whom it's easy, one who's going on the middle of the road, and he's consistent and gradualistic in his Yiddishkeit, and he doesn't fall off the road. There's joy in Yiddishkeit, but the joy of somebody who's struggled and overcome is so much greater than the joy of the person who doesn't struggle, that it's like light and darkness. It's one of the points the Alter Rebbe makes. Now, this is a semi-review of what we've learned in the last few classes. Tonight, in Mitzvah Shem, we're going to explore the notion of the joy of the Baal Tshuva more, the second kind of joy, the joy that comes after struggle a little bit more. But I want to set the stage for you. I want to share with you a personal opinion. Obviously, Chassidus has a certain philosophy about life in Yiddishkeit. And there are many things about what Chassidus says about how a person should live that are unique, that are different. And many of the things that Chassidus says that are unique are actually not so unique. They're written in very basic sources. And some of the things Chassidus says are very extreme, very unusual, very different. It seems to me that the Alter Rebbe is trying to develop a pattern here. And the pattern is, he is trying to define what it means to serve Hashem according to Chassidus. And it is this. Serving Hashem according to Chassidus means serving Hashem with the soul, with the neshama. I don't have to tell you that Judaism believes in a soul. Right? Why don't I have to tell it to you? Because it says in Genesis. You don't even have to read Rashi or Talmud. There's a pasuk in Chumash. There's a concept of a soul, of a godly soul, of a Jewish soul, of a connection to God, what have you. What Chassidus has made special about the soul is that Chassidus proposes that the soul is not just a concept. I have a neshama. Okay, may he rest in peace. I don't bother my soul doesn't bother me, I live my life. How do I live my life? I live my life with my consciousness, with my awareness, with my environment. Chassidus says the soul is not just an academic truth, it's a practical truth. Because you have a neshama, you have certain powers. You have possibilities because you have a neshama that you wouldn't have otherwise. And the proposal, the message of Chassidus is, live by your soul. If I needed to qualify this a little bit more, I would say this. Kabbalah is older than Chassidus. It's been around longer. Kabbalah also makes the same message. That's why there's so many similarities in terms of Hashkafa in Kabbalah and Chassidus, especially the Kabbalah of the Arizal. So Kabbalah would also say to the Kabbalist, serve God with your soul. The difference is that Kabbalah talks to special people. Not everybody on the street's a Kabbalist. I mean, a lot of people wear red bands and drink the Kabbalah drink, but we'll talk about that after Yom Kippur, okay? My list is full. But real Mekubalim, real elevated Jews who are truly in the realm of Kabbalah are few and far between. There are a lot of such people. Chassidus speaks to the masses what Kabbalah speaks to the rare individual. That's really the way you should say it. The Baal Shem Tov and his message and his legacy are that ideas that Kabbalah taught to a handful of people have become the property of everybody. It doesn't mean that Chassidim are Mekubalim. They aren't. It means that some of the tendencies, some of the attitudes, some of the values that are core in Kabbalah are mainstream. They're made the property of the Hamoin, of the masses, of the ordinary person in the framework of Chassidus. And as a practical matter, one of those issues is, don't just have a soul, live by the soul. And there's some very interesting things about the neshama. The soul has certain attributes, or certain qualities. And it seems to me that over the course of these chapters, what the Alter Rebbe is doing is he's describing to you the neshama's reality. And he's challenging you and say, live this way. You have a neshama. You have a godly soul. It's buried underneath a body and an animal soul and a distraction and worry and doubt and moods and mortgage payments and a job and a second job and a weekend job. There's so many distractions to our getting in touch with our inner self. Chassidus says, I challenge you. Live by your soul. I don't think living by your soul necessarily means to feel the soul. Experiencing the soul is a special experience. But live by the values and the priorities of the soul. And over the course of the next few chapters, 4 ideas are going to be proposed. 2 of them have already been proposed. 2 will be proposed. Which are essentially the Alter Rebbe saying, this is how the soul feels about this. I want you to feel that way too. This is how your neshama experiences reality. You as a conscious human being on this planet live by the soul's values. And they are joy, clarity, love, and faith. The first thing the Alter Rebbe said is the soul is joyous. Why is the soul joyous? Take a wild guess. Why not? Right? We're not joyous because we're distracted, because we're bogged down. The soul's in touch. The soul's connected. Or as you said correctly, the soul has clarity. And there's another aspect of the soul.
Well, it's a gift from God, so it has to be.
It's more than a gift from God. It's an expression of God.
For a connection.
Right. There's no masks. We have the masks. The soul doesn't. To say it in slightly different words, the soul has trust.
Then that doesn't need trust. It has knowledge.
I mean the point that it has no doubt. Bitochen means trust and no doubt. We sometimes lack trust. The neshama has trust because it's tuned in. And from that trust comes the joy and the clarity of the soul. And because the soul is in touch, it has a clarity, and this clarity involves an incredible joy. The beautiful words are, it's emancipated, the soul is free, the soul is not a prisoner. And the Alter Rebbe is challenging us and saying, your soul is joyous because it's clear and it's free. You live joyously, you live with clarity, you live with freedom. It's hidden. The neshama is under a lot of layers. When a person does tshuva and cracks, so to speak, proverbially, the mask, the cloud of the confusion and the distractionness of the Yetzer Hara, we experience clarity. So Alter Rebbe says, maintain it. Stay in that space. And the Mitzvah Hashem, the next two classes, we're going to talk about two more symptoms of the neshama. The first is Ahavat Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew, which I suppose in more philosophical terms we would talk about unity. In the realm of the soul there's unity, in the realm of the body there's division. And the Alter Rebbe would say, don't live by the body where all the divisions exist, live by the soul where the unity prevails. And then the class after that, Yossi Hashem, he talks about Amunah, faith. We struggle with faith because of the body, because of the world, because of life. The neshama has an issue with faith because it's tuned in. So this sets the stage for tonight's discussion. We talked about tshuva. Now, the Rebbe made the argument that when a person does tshuva, they're essentially breaking a cloud, a veneer, an obstacle, which is in reality nothing. And therefore, when it's broken, there's a certain kind of a clarity and a certain kind of a joy that accompanies it. Says the Alter Rebbe, I challenge you to maintain this joy. This is the position. So what we want to envision or imagine is a Baal Tshuva. And again, I don't know all of you, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're all Baalei Tshuva. That means to say we all struggle. It's not easy for any of us. Nobody here, unless, if you're a tzaddik, raise your hand and we'll give you a gold star. Jeffrey, for you I'll give you a kiss on the forehead. Better than a gold star. You're not such a tzaddik anymore, huh? You're back in the way.
But we didn't discover it yet. None of us are Baal Tshuva.
I think we're Baalei Tshuva. We just do tshuva about 4 times a day. we're kind of...
Every 4 minutes.
No. Some do it every 5 or 6 minutes. Okay. Which means that we struggle. We struggle. We're normal. We're normal people. And normal people struggle between the values of Yiddishkeit and the world. Because the values of the world are not the same as the values of Yiddishkeit. And we can't avoid the world. When you're 5, you can avoid the world. When you're 15, you think you're going to change the world. But eventually you discover you have to deal with the world. You have to live in it. And it's the struggle of life against Yiddishkeit. The values of Yiddishkeit are the values of the neshama. So a person is a Baal Tshuva, which means to say they've gone through a struggle. And with the help of God, they've gone past it. And they have a certain clarity, and they have a certain joy. Says the Alter Rebbe, I challenge you to stay in this space. And he makes a very interesting psychological proposal. He says, listen, right now you're clear. At this moment, you've conquered. At this moment, you've surmounted, you've gotten past the most recent doubt, the most recent negativity, the most recent spell of sadness, and you have a certain clarity, a certain mission, a certain direction, a certain joy. Stay in that space. And he says, I'll admit, I'll be honest. I'll be honest. Alter Rebbe never lies. Sometimes we love the fact that he's so honest, and sometimes it makes us so nervous with his honesty. There's one place in Tanya where Alter Rebbe says to the Beinoni, it's really hard to be a Beinoni. Throughout the Tanya, you're always told, of course, how could you sin? In one place, Alter Rebbe says, it's not so easy to stay where you're supposed to be. In chapter 15, Perek Tezvav, he says, yes, to be a Bein is not so simple. I'll be honest, says the Alter Rebbe. Any human being at any moment of his life can look at his glass as half full and half empty. You have as much reason to be sad and as much reason to be joyous. And these are the choices. You have a body, you have an animal soul, you live in the real world. None of those things are friends of God and godliness in Judaism. But you also have a soul, which is an expression of God. And as you put it before, it isn't only that it sees God, it's an expression of. So your choices are simple. And in the words of the Alter Rebbe, you can choose Itzaven Haguf, the sadness because of the body, and you can choose Simchas HaNefesh. You can choose the joy of the soul, and the choice is yours. Now, we're not talking here about not being religious. That's not the issue. It's how we're going to be religious. A person can choose to be frum, but the whole sentiment, the whole attitude is, the world is a pain in the neck. My life is a contradiction to my Yiddishkeit. You know the great story from Moshe Feinstein. I've told you the story a few times. It's a very interesting story. It's a painful story. Moshe Feinstein, who was during his lifetime, without a question, in America, the Paisek Hadar, one of the greatest rabbis of our time, came to this country probably in the 1920s. So he knew personally, the era of Yiddishkeit in America, where if you wanted to keep Shabbos, you starved. Because in those days it was 6-day work week, and if you didn't work Shabbos, you'd get fired. My grandfather, Avashom, told me his father would come home and say he was fired because he wouldn't come in on Shabbos. His boss, who was usually a Jew who spoke Yiddish, would say, if you don't come tomorrow, don't come Monday. And he'd come home to his wife and say, Simme mit mechub gesucht von der Arbeit. I was fired. And his wife, my great-grandmother, would say, Zag mich nicht. My great-grandmother, don't worry, God has helped till now and will help from now on. My grandfather once said to me, you don't know how it feels to come home from school and to find your furniture on the sidewalk. This is what Shemitah Shabbos was in the 20s and 30s in America. Pre and post-depression. It was very, very difficult. And he was here, the Moshe Feinstein was here. And the vast majority of Jews lost Shabbos and lost everything. They didn't want to become secular. They wanted to be frum, and they figured, okay, our one weakness is Shabbos, but Shabbos is one of those things which are do or die. Shabbos is, if a person can't keep kosher and keeps the other 612 mitzvahs, chances are that his children will inherit Yiddishkeit from him. But Shabbos, the two sins you're not allowed to transgress, because if you transgress those, you've dissociated from Judaism, or Shabbos and idol worship. And all those Jews who lost Shabbos lost it all. They lost their children and so on. So he comes to the Moshe Feinstein, and he says, Rebbe, in my generation, when the vast majority of Orthodox Jews lost their identity because they worked Shabbos, I did not work Shabbos. And none of my children are frum. It's not fair. I paid the price for Shemitah. No, this person comes to the Moshe. The Moshe Feinstein's children are. He says, how come my children are not frum? So the Moshe told him a very wise word. It's very sad and painful, but this is what he said to him. He says, tell me, you kept Shabbos, yeah? But what was the message you gave your children? Thank God we're Jews and we have Shabbos. Woe is us that we have Shabbos. So he says, Rebbe, how should I be happy about it? Shabbos was a prison. Shabbos was the enemy of my sustenance. So I kept Shabbos and I lamented it. He says, this is the problem. You could be a Yid. There's an old expression, Yiddishkeit, es ist schwer zu sein a Yid. It's difficult to be a Jew. Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid is a pretty sure way to lose it. But it's a choice. There is a Yiddishkeit. There is a practicing Jew whose attitude is, it's hard. It's hard. The world is my enemy. Life is my enemy. This world is not in contact with Yiddishkeit. I'll survive. I'll manage. I'll make it. But I'm going to resent it. And you can live your whole life that way. Says Alter Rebbe, if you make that choice, what you're essentially saying is, you're prioritizing your body. And your neshama and Yiddishkeit have to survive in spite of it. But there's an alternative. And the alternative is to live by the priorities of the soul. Alter Rebbe says, the other option is to celebrate your Jewishness. Celebrate the fact that because of your neshama and because of your Yiddishkeit, you're much more than a human being. You're connected to God. And this connection to God makes you essentially an expression of Ein Sof, an expression of God, an expression of infinity. And yes, it's hard. Yes, there are hardships. Yes, there are distractions. But there's something very exhilarating about the thought, I'm a physical person, human being, just like my neighbor, and because of Yiddishkeit, I'm much more than a person. I have a connection to Hashem that makes me an expression of godliness, and there's incredible joy in that. I told you this story before, and I'll tell it to you again. The Helika Batichever, right? It's always good to mention his name, especially before Rosh Hashanah. We can use it. The Batichever. The Batichever was a Chassidish Rebbe. And as was the custom in some cultures, the Hasidic Rebbe, the Holy Master, would go to the Amid in the morning prayer in Shacharis, to say the Berachas HaShachar. In other words, he wasn't necessarily the Chazan, but the blessings in the morning he would read, and everybody would answer Amen. So he goes to the Amid and he says all the blessings, and he skips the blessing Shelo Yasani Goy. The blessing where he says, thank God I'm not a Gentile, he skipped it. So after davening, they told him, Rabbi, you missed one. He says, no, I didn't miss it. He said, I got up in the morning, and it crossed my mind, what happened if I was Ivan? His neighbor was Ivan. And I got so excited. I said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, thank God I'm not Ivan. He says, I can't make the blessing twice in one day. What a Yid has is a human being. And Yiddishkeit means that in every act of Yiddishkeit, he's a continuation, he's an expression of godliness. Says Alter Rebbe, it's a choice. And it's a challenge. Why? Because life is real. The sadness of this world, when I say the sadness of this world, the emes says even the materialism is sad, because you're never satisfied with it. But from a perspective of a religious person, the sadness of this world is the enemy of religion. It's the enemy of Shabbos, it's the enemy of kosher, it's the enemy of piety, it's the enemy of fineness, it's the enemy of kindness, it's the enemy of forgiveness, it's the enemy of every good value. And I could say, it's not fair. What do you want? And I'd be right. Or I could say, thank God I have the wisdom to be bigger than it. Is it easy? No. But it's a choice. And Alter Rebbe says, this is the challenge. We're talking to the Baal Tshuva who's now achieved clarity, right? He's in between sins. Right? At this juncture, he has clarity. It says, klor. It's clear. And the clarity gives him incredible joy. I feel free. I'm a human being again. I'm connected to the Eibishter. Now the Rebbe says, you have to maintain that. You're going to maintain that as follows. By saying, from this moment forward, I am a soul person. Soul, I don't mean alone. A neshama person. And what that means is I am going to celebrate how incredibly meaningful it is that I have a neshama, and when I do a mitzvah, I am becoming an extension of the Ein Sof. Even though every single time I make that choice, I can just as legitimately say, woe is me. Not woe is me, my life is hard. Woe is me, Nebuch, I have to do Torah mitzvahs in the real world. And keep Torah mitzvahs from the perspective of the woe is me. It's not, the option is not to not be frum. But the option is to say I'm being frum, but it's sort of not fair. Alter Rebbe says, don't do that. Don't choose that. Choose the soul priority. Choose the soul preference. Both are legitimate. There is as much reason to be unhappy about the fact that you've been challenged with Yiddishkeit in this world as there is to be joyous. Choose the joy. The sadness is never going to go away. It will always be there. You'll have to constantly do it. You have to renew it perpetually. But it's an neshama option. It's a neshama option. And this is why this is so unique to Chassidus. Because Chassidus says, very holy people, wear their soul on their sleeves. The rest of us, it's under a couple of layers. But either we can experience the neshama, or we should act in concert with the neshama. We should act as the neshama feels. And the neshama is happy about life. The neshama is happy about Yiddishkeit. Because the neshama understands that in Yiddishkeit it's free. The neshama understands that in Yiddishkeit it's connected to the Eibishter. And it's a struggle which never finishes. Every minute, the Mishkal HaShava, the balanced scale, is going to say happy, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad. And they're both true. Choose joy.
What about being sad about other things? Not being a Jew, like Yaakov Avinu, for instance.
It was held against him.
I know, but he was even sorry. He was sad.
But it was held against him?
Right.
It was held against him. Okay. This is a very, very complicated question. You know why? Because it's a real question. I play it safe. I stay in the realm of philosophy. Nobody gets hurt. The answer to your question really is that certainly there's a difference between being sad about Yiddishkeit and sad about material things. But in general in life, sadness is a defeatist approach. Even in business.
I'm just saying, how do you conquer that? If it's your children, like Yaakov Avinu, for instance.
You have to ultimately conquer it with bitachon.
Does Tanya teach that?
With bitachon. Trust.
You don't have enough trust?
Huh?
Yaakov Avinu doesn't have enough trust?
I'm telling you that it says in Chazal that Yaakov Avinu, the Rebbe has a whole sikh, he says Yaakov Avinu was punished because of his deficiency in trust. Had he trusted, he wouldn't have had the trouble that he had. In the madreg of Yaakov Avinu, he should have had more trust. We don't want to start up with Yaakov Avinu because it leaves us out in the cold.
What chance would it have?
Okay, take it one day at a time and one experience of trust at a time. We have free will. But there's a complication here. It's not a complication, but it's a tax. It's a price. What we have established is, okay, now I'm sorry for my repetition, but I'm not sorry, if you know what I mean. We're talking about the Baal Tshuva who at this moment has clarity. And now the Rebbe is challenging him, stay in this space. Stay here. What does that mean, stay in this space? Don't allow Yiddishkeit to become a negative experience. Although it legitimately can. He's making that admission. Make Yiddishkeit a positive experience. Look at your life and the way your neshama sees it and see what an opportunity. I can do another mitzvah. And there's a catch. And the catch is that in order to maintain this, or let me tell it to you straight, in order to be a chassid, a true chassid, which means a person who lives with the joy of the soul, he's joyous, he's alive with optimism and positiveness because he's connected to something from a different world. Yiddishkeit has to become the entire priority of your life. That means, this is a practical message. The way Yiddishkeit is designed, you have obligations. You have obligations. You have to pray. You have to give tzedakah. You also have limitations. Limitations means things you're not allowed to do. But there's also an incredible amount of time and things which are your choice, which is called reshus, right? You have to get up in the morning, you have to daven. And then the next time you have to daven is 5 or 6 hours from now. You want to eat, you make a bracha. And then you can eat for an hour, or 2, or 3. And then you burn to Hashem again. There's so much of life which is not directly Yiddishkeit. Says the Alter Rebbe, in order for a person to maintain the joy of the soul, their entire life that they live has to be centered around Yiddishkeit. And he explains it as follows. He says like this. We know what tshuva means. Tshuva means I did something wrong, I got to fix it. How do I fix it? There's a whole process. We've been talking about it for a while. But there's another tshuva. And this other tshuva is constant. This other tshuva is perpetual. This other tshuva you never have a break from. And I'll explain it to you in practical terms. The meaning, the Hebrew word tshuva means return. Return means to put back. The reason you have to put something back is because you've moved it into the wrong place. This pen was sitting here, I moved it here. This is an act of tshuva. Okay? I'm not going to get Gan Eden for this, but it is an act of tshuva. It's an act of return. You put something back where it belongs, it's true. If we do something wrong, we've taken some of ourselves, some of our own energy, and put it where it doesn't belong. Tshuva means retrieving it, taking it back and putting it where it does belong. But there's another concept of tshuva. For something you didn't do, but God did. What is that? He took your neshama,
That's it.
which is in Gan Eden, and the soul in paradise was at home. The soul in paradise cannot say it's a Shvetz Zayin Yid. It maybe say it's a Shvetz Zayin Goy, but it's there. Up there, Yiddishkeit is natural, and it's put it into this world. So there's a concept of tshuva, of bringing the soul back to God. It's not about sin at all. We're at Rosh Hashanah Mamish. This week is Rosh Hashanah. This is called the higher tshuva. In Kabbalah, it's called the higher tshuva. Toshav Heilah, the higher tshuva. The higher tshuva is not about sin. The higher tshuva is about returning to God. Now, this doesn't mean chas v'sholem, that the soul should leave the body, God forbid. The person.
That's the ultimate return.
We're talking about Benoni now? We're still talking about Benoni? We're talking about Tzaddikim at this point.
Beinani, me and you, this is so practical, it's incredible. The idea of returning our soul to God, chas v'sholem, God forbid to construe it as the opposite of life, it's in a mitzvah. Every mitzvah is a piece of Hashem. Each time you do a mitzvah, you are connected to the Eibishter. Problem is, then the mitzvah passes. And then what? You're a person again. So you do another mitzvah. Every time you do a mitzvah, you have returned your neshama to Hashem. You have connected your soul in this world with godliness. So the practical side of this challenge, okay, now here goes, repetition. The Alter Rebbe is saying to a Jew, you have as much reason to be sad as to be happy. In Judaism, choose the joy of Judaism. Choose to say, I am going to live my life as a Jew and be positive about it. What's it positive about? I have a soul, and in Judaism, I'm connected to Hashem. But the practical side of this attitude is that your whole life is mitzvahs. You don't feel that Judaism is obligations. Because of Judaism and obligation, you meet your obligations, and then you're just a person. In other words, there's an attitudinal side. The attitudinal side is the choice of optimism. And the practical side is, I live from mitzvah to mitzvah. My life is Yiddishkeit. I have a job, my job is about Yiddishkeit. How? Tzedakah, favors for people. There's a million ways a person can make every single aspect of his life Yiddishkeit. But in order for this challenge to be seen through as a practical matter, the attitude has to be complemented by a lifestyle that's practical. And the practical lifestyle is the way I make that the joy of the soul should be my joy is because I live from mitzvah to mitzvah. My life is Yiddishkeit. And he quotes a Gemara. The Talmud says that there's a concept of doing tshuva all the time. Okay. The Talmud says it is a concept of doing tshuva all the time. Kol yama b'tshuva. There's also a Gemara that's brought in Tanya called Rabbi Yechanan said, Halavai shispal adam kol hayom kula. There's a concept of davening, of praying all day long, which was mentioned earlier in Tanya. But here he mentions the concept of doing tshuva all the time. Kol yama b'tshuva. Of course, the question becomes, how can you do tshuva all the time? You do tshuva when you sin? And we have to assume that every once in a while we take a break. Yeah, we miss once in a while we skip an opportunity. So what's such kol yama b'tshuva? And the answer is kol yama b'tshuva. I'm doing tshuva all the time doesn't mean for sin. Every minute of my life I'm returning to God. Not God forbid that the neshama is leaving this world, but I make my life Yiddishkeit, because in Yiddishkeit I'm free. In Yiddishkeit I'm special, and in Yiddishkeit there is joy. So this is the point that the Alter Rebbe says. You are right now in a space of joy and clarity. I challenge you to remain there. There's an attitude, and there's a practical side. The attitude is, this is what the soul is feeling, and the practical side is make Yiddishkeit the center of your life. This is the Tanya Chassid. And it ain't easy. It's not simple, but it's real. In other words, a person who, in fact, establishes a life where everything about them revolves around Yiddishkeit, there is an incredible amount of joy in that. It's a madrig, it's a level. It is absolutely Beinani. Absolutely Beinani. But Beinani is pretty elusive also. An ordinary person could make his life, to live from mitzvah to mitzvah. There are such personalities. I mean, everybody can do this. I believe everybody can do this. But there are people, I know a Yid in Crown Heights. I've known him all my life. He just looks for mitzvahs. He's just looking to help people. And the moment he's finished helping one, he's on to helping somebody else. And he's a perpetual nudge because he always needs money. So at first he's a pain in the neck, and then he becomes a tzaddik. He's pushed a Yid who lives with mitzvahs. His whole life is helping people. Such a person is a free person, because his life is defined by his neshama. He has the same challenges we do. He also has a house and a business and a mortgage. We won't talk about how well they're doing, but he's doing terrific, no matter what the business is doing, because he's living in a different space. His space says, I live in the joy of the soul. And the way for the joy of the soul to manifest practically is because Kol Yama B'Tshuva. Every second he's doing tshuva. He's always doing mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe makes two more points, or several more points, to elucidate this idea. He says, number one, think of it in these terms. Imagine a prince, the son of a king, a prince, who's been captured, who's been taken off to some foreign land and been made into the lowest type of prisoner. He's treated like subhuman, less than human. The Alter Rebbe used the term toichem beis hasurim. The lowest kind of prisoners were used as slaves for a mill. You know what that means? Just like they used to have the galleys, those ships where you'd have 120 or 200 and something slaves chained to their seats on a boat, and they would row for 10 years. They would never get out of that seat. So they would have human beings who would walk around in a circle and spin a stone to grind wheat. It was the lowest form of slavery. And then this prince is freed, and he's brought home. He's full of boils, and he's full of sores. He smells, and he's dirty, and he's sickly, and he's diseased, and let's not even describe what's coming out of his body. And when his father sees him, he's thrilled, he's overjoyed. As smelly as he is, he's free. So Alter Rebbe is trying to say this. In Yiddishkeit, we're free. In Yiddishkeit, there's an incredible joy. Even though we never escape this life, if a person chooses this value system that the Alter Rebbe is proposing, what happens? It's the same world. The question of joy and sadness always remains the same. Every minute of your life you have just as much justification, basis, to be sad as to be happy. You always have the options. You always have the choices. And Alter Rebbe is saying, stay up. And at a certain point you say, well, do me a favor. I did a mitzvah this morning, I did a mitzvah this afternoon, did a mitzvah now. It's still the same world. And the same Yetzer Hara. The Alter Rebbe says, imagine yourself as a prince who's come home who's smelly. You're free. And yes, it never finishes. In other words, life must always be this combination of the joy of the soul and this what's called Kol Yama B'Tshuva, a life of tshuva, a life of perpetual goodness, which keeps us in this free space. But Alter Rebbe says, this is a real way. This is the way I understand it. To remain a chassid. This is the type of chassid be'emes. The word chassid has a lot of meanings to a lot of people. To some people it's a membership in a club. But the true definition of a chassid is an neshama person. And it's conscious. The symptom of it is joy, happiness. And along with joy, by the way, comes other characteristics like humility. But that's another discussion. The way the chassid maintains this joy is by living a life of tshuva, not for sin. I live to connect to Hashem. I do one mitzvah, and a second mitzvah, and a third mitzvah, and a fourth mitzvah. And then the Alter Rebbe says something else. This entire model that we're describing, says the Alter Rebbe, is analogous to our exodus from Egypt. Remember, we were once slaves in Egypt? Then we left. Right? You may not remember, but it's written in the books. You remember it's written in the books. It was slaves in Egypt. The Eibishter made us free. Says the Alter Rebbe, this challenge that I am proposing to you is similar to the challenge of the Jews of the Exodus, who left Mitzrayim. Because what is the challenge? The challenge is, right now you have clarity, maintain it. Right now you have joy, stay in this space. Realistically, as a frum Jew, as a practicing Jew in the real world, you're constantly reminded that the world is not in concert with Yiddishkeit. When Mashiach comes, the world will be in concert with Yiddishkeit. That's what Mashiach means. But at this moment, the world's values and the world's priorities, what the world considers important and meaningful and honorable and prestigious, is not Torah mitzvahs. So therefore, you have reason to be sad, and you have reason to be happy. Alter Rebbe says, stay in the happy space. Live a life of the soul. And the key is maintenance. What's the maintenance? Maintenance? Yiddishkeit. Everything is Yiddishkeit. So Alter Rebbe, this entire challenge is very similar to our exodus in Egypt. What happened when we left Egypt? We ran away. Says the Alter Rebbe, from what did we run away? The Egyptians threw us out. They threw us out. The Pharaoh came to Moshe Rabbeinu in his pajamas. I can see my Malama telling me the story still. He said, get out. Just leave. They threw him out. Why is it described as an escape? Why? There are many reasons. But the Alter Rebbe is a very profound reason. The reason the exodus from Egypt is described as an escape is because the Jews were running away from themselves. What happened to the Jews in Egypt was not plan A. It was not what was supposed to happen. In other words, when the Jews left Egypt and they came to Mount Sinai and they got the Torah, that should have been Mashiach. It should have been the complete marriage between the Jewish people and God, not just a formal marriage. But we showed up at the wedding, smelly. We came to Har Sinai unprepared. Because we went into Egypt, we became slaves, and nobody is going to understate the severity of our slavery. But the slavery extended beyond the servitude, beyond the work. We became Egyptified. Spiritually, we lost our soul. The Rambam describes it, that the effect of the Jewish experience in Egypt was that it almost completely erased the entire initiative of Avraham Avinu. And the Eibush made a nest and sent Moshe Rabbeinu at the nick of time and saved this entire process. In other words, the Jews in Egypt were not supposed to become pagan. They were supposed to become slaves. And they became slaves to the deity. They became worshippers of what the Egyptians worshiped. And what did the Egyptians worship? Nature. The river the Nile. The hand that feeds you, not the mind that's connected to that hand. They worshiped nature. They worshiped the here and the now. The Jews left Egypt. And they themselves were completely caught up in the inhibition, in the limitation of the natural world. You know, in 6 days of Rosh Hashanah, 5 days of Rosh Hashanah, in the prayer of Rosh Hashanah, we're going to mention our Exodus. And we're going to quote the famous passage where the Eibishter says, so says God, I remember the love you showed me in your youth. Hashem says to the Jewish nation, when you followed me into the desert. So it's explained in Sfarim. What happened? Moses comes to the Jewish people and says, you're going to be free. You're not going to be slaves anymore. Yeah, sounds great. But where are we going to go? We're going to go into the desert. Yeah. What are we going to eat? Who's going to protect us from the sun and from the scorpions and from all the other, unmentionables in the desert? So Moshe said, don't worry. Trust God. And the Jew says, I don't know how to trust. The river the Nile, I can trust because I can see it. It floods the plains, it floods the riverbanks year after year after year. It's totally predictable. It's always there. This is God. I should trust a God that I cannot see. I should trust a God in a land where there is no water and there is no shade and there is no fertility. I can't. This was the depth of the slavery of the Jews in Egypt. It went far beyond actual servitude. We became like the Egyptians. The Medrash says that when the sea had to split, the sea couldn't discern who was Jewish and who was Egyptian. They were just looked as equally pagan. And God had to select to tell them, these are the Jews and these are the Egyptians. So, when the Jews left Egypt, the reality of the Jewish situation at that time was that spiritually they were in the same space as the Egyptians themselves. They worshipped what's predictable, what is known. As a result, the Jew has a dilemma. God is performing miracle after miracle after miracle for him. And he says to himself, me? I don't trust. God performs a miracle, 6 hours later, I go into withdrawal. I go into depression. He has to perform a miracle for me every 3 hours. After 3 hours, I've reached my limit, I lose my faith, and I'm in bad shape. So a miracle occurs. The firstborn die. All kinds of wonderful things happen. The Jew runs out of Egypt before he runs out of steam. He's running out of Egypt because he knows that in a few minutes, he's going to say, wait a minute, what am I going to eat? So he's running away from himself. And the Alter Rebbe says the entire history of the Jewish nation, from that moment until Mashiach comes, is a continuum of this challenge. We're running out of Egypt to find another Egypt, which we then escape. And the escape is this combination of the practical performance of Torah, mitzvahs, and the joy of the soul that accompanies it. So Alter Rebbe says, this is the way I see it. This is the value system, this is the model of what a chassid is. A chassid is an neshama person, and the symptom of it being discussed today is joy. What am I happy about? I have an neshama. I am a Jew, and in Judaism I'm free. How? Through Torah mitzvahs. And when I do one mitzvah and I'm done with it, how do I stay free? I do a second mitzvah and a third mitzvah. It doesn't finish. He says, when Mashiach comes, we'll be truly free. Because when Mashiach comes, this world and the Jewish person will be in a state of freedom. So the Alter Rebbe says, I acknowledge the challenge. I'm putting this in my own words. There is always this challenge. He says, this is the choice a person should make. Instead of seeing life from the sadness of the real world. And when I say the sadness of the real world, I mean the idea that this world is not the friend of Yiddishkeit. And a Jew could say, it's difficult to be a Jew. So don't choose that. Choose the joy of the soul. It's realistic. It's a much better option. It's a neshama option. And he finishes the chapter by saying one more thing. Oh, by the way, you have this challenge that never finishes. You're constantly leaving Egypt again. And you're preferring what's called simchas hanefesh, the joy of the soul, to the tzavin haguf, the sadness in the body. There's another factor. It's not for naught. Hashem is not playing a game with us. Takes a bunch of souls, puts them in a place where they don't belong, and says, don't be depressed. The neshama belongs in Gan Eden. In Gan Eden, the neshama is at home. Take a neshama, put it in this world, tell him to be a yid, and say, don't not only be a yid, be optimistic, be positive, be joyous, be up about it. There's a reason for this. And that is, it's not only the emancipation of the soul. In other words, it's the raising up of the world. What we accomplish in our lifetime, in effect, is redeem the whole world. We're not just redeeming ourselves. Every physical thing that we use in Yiddishkeit, including the words we say and the thoughts we think and the actions we do, raises up the world. It emancipates the world. And this emancipation ends when Mashiach comes. Because the meaning of Mashiach is that the values of the soul become the realities of the body. The Taich Mashiach means that this Olam Hazeh, this world, is in concert with Torah. And at that point, it's not going to be a choice of Itzav and Aguf or Simchas HaNefesh, the sadness of the body, the joy of the soul, because the body is going to have the same values that the soul has. We reach that point through the Torah and mitzvahs, which we perform now. The Yiddishkeit we do is not just a way of redeeming ourselves, it's redeeming the world. And the end of that redemption is the revelation of Mashiach. Go ahead, please.
Let's say this is a scenario. The biggest mitzvah is to study Torah, right?
Am I entitled to answer that as I wish, or do I have to confirm? Yeah, much success.
Okay, so studying Torah is the biggest mitzvah. Let's say I like studying Torah. I'm not going against my nature. That's all I want to do. I don't want to do anything else.
No.
So is that
redemption?
A mitzvah,
is that freedom?
Or is it feeding my ego?
Both. It's certainly better than eating chazad.
Yeah.
Right? Now, of course, the answer to a person like you is figure out how much you like to learn and learn a little more. Or teach it to somebody else. Bring into your life an element of challenge. To study Torah is a very good thing. Okay. Right. Right. But the challenge for a person like you is to find in Torah an aspect which would be called avodah, pushing yourself beyond limits. That would be a Yetzias Mitzrayim. That would be your personal exodus. And nobody is beyond that. Nobody is outside of that scope. In Lubavitch, we're taught that the most important mitzvah is generational. Every generation has a different most important mitzvah. And if you'll ask the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the most important mitzvah in this generation is to make another Jew. Macha nocha Yidden. And that's a Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yeah? And in any aspect, in any facet. Okay? Good. I want to wish everybody a Kasiva v'Chasima Toiva.